If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people who have had extremely distressing paranormal activity in their homes, what's your story? When my son was 3, he started having dreams and visions of people coming out of holes and dancing in his room. He said they were trying to tell him something. He also said he would wake up to see faces in the dark and they were screaming at him. There were many nights when his screaming would wake me up and I would run into his room. It honestly sounded like he was being attacked. One night in his room he was telling me about one of his experiences. I saw a streak of white light move up over his face. Another time I ran into his room and he was up on his knees looking around the room. I didn't say anything and just continued to watch him in the dark. This went on for about 15 minutes and finally he looked at me and he said one word, Manya. It was apparently his name for whatever spirit he was seeing. Another time on the baby monitor and we heard a loud male voice say, "Stop that." We happened to know a mother and daughter psychic team and enlisted their help. They tuned in and both said they saw an evil old man spirit from the 40s who brought in other souls to make mischief. He also smoked a cigar. We often smelled cigar smoke in our hallway outside my son's bedroom. They tried cleansing the house remotely. They lived in another city. We thought all was good until one evening we were walking into our dining room to sit down when my son went flying forward into the table. He started crying and said that someone pushed him from behind. We kept our son in our room that night and my wife and I both heard what sounded like an old man making gagging noises from my other son's room. He was 11 months old. Our friends put together a whole team and they came and cleansed the house. It was quite a process and our neighbors probably thought we were real weirdos, but they got the job done. We haven't had any issues in 10 years. It was really scary. I was 4 years old, and I used to sleep with my light dimmed and my bedroom door slightly ajar. I had begun waking up in the middle of the night for whatever reason, and from my pillow I could see through the open crack of the door into the dark landing outside. It started with me being able to see a dark figure pacing back and forth along the landing. Just a shadow really, but enough movement to tell. After a few nights of that, with me mostly just being confused but keeping quiet, I woke up and the shadow wasn't pacing anymore. It was standing where I could see it through the door crack, as if looking through to the room at me. It weirded me out, but I wasn't really old enough to understand yet. Still, after a night or two of that, I asked my parents to shut my door when they went to bed now. However, obviously that's not the end. So, houses built in the 80s/90s in the UK have tiny little windows above all the doors in the house. A night or two after having my door shut and thinking I was good, I vividly remember a hand pressed to the top of the window from the outside. It got worse after that. I woke up in the complete dark one night. My light dimmer had a bad habit of slowly ticking down to dark. I wasn't completely freaked out still, but had a light bulb moment. Hide under my sheets, perfect. So I did. I heard the floorboards outside my room creak as if something had walked over them. At which point, silhouetted by my tiny night light, a figure rose from the side of my bed. I had super thin sheets back then. I couldn't make out details, but it was big, bigger than an adult I had thought at the time. And it started to breath in deep, low slow breaths. Then I felt something on my head. I reached up in there, as if holding the top of my head, was a hand, its skin very warm to the touch. I was still mostly confused at first, and called out, "Dad? Mom? Brother?" No response. Then I felt fingers wrap around my ankles. My sheets never moved. The figure leaned down as if leaning its face into mine through the sheets, though I couldn't make out its features. But I knew it was looking at me. That's when the real dread kicked in, a feeling I'd become familiar with forever. That cold, immobilizing fear of the unknown. I must have laid there with it for at least an hour, with it just holding me and standing there, no and then leaning down to look at me, before I fell asleep. I asked my parents about it, tried to tell them, didn't get believed, but they did buy me thicker sheets pretty soon after, and that's what became of every night. I'd wake up, hug the blankets in around me as if trapping them with my head, hands and feet kept me safe, hear the creak of the floorboards and the breathing would start. It started adding more hands till it was on my head, holding my wrists, holding my ankles, pressed to my back and stomach. And we'd stay there for an hour at least every night, me barely trying to make a noise or move, stuck in that fucking terror. I still struggle to sleep in the dark or without something covering my head. I feel exposed at night, and I'm 32 now. I lived in a basement a few years ago. It started getting weird with the noises in the kitchen, of plates shifting around at night and such, then things on my desk would fall over, no matter how far from the edge I put them, all these small things you could possibly give an explanation to. Well, it's been years and I still have no explanation for the following. This was Rome in August, so very warm. I was up on my phone until late, then I decided to set it down for sleep, and I remember perfectly the sudden sense of dread I felt, paired with a sensation of being super cold, out of nowhere. Weirded out, I sat down on the bed and got under the covers, and then I saw it. A big, gray and electric blue cloud of smoke moving above my head, floating in my room and then through the wall. I was paralyzed by fear for a good 5 minutes, then I went in my mother's room. To make matters creepier, my landlord, who lived above us, claimed that his house was haunted, without me mentioning my own experiences, and that he would see a naked woman running through his corridors. I was 16 years old. I wasn't high, it certainly wasn't a dream, it couldn't possibly be a light reflection of any kind, a trick of the eye or actual smoke from somewhere. I'm not a religious person and I would consider myself a skeptic, but I know what I saw. I think these are the kind of things you can't believe in until you've experienced them. This probably doesn't fall under extremely distressing, but I'll put my story down. The earliest memory I have is of an experience with an apparition. Based on what I know, I was no more than 3 years old when I saw it. Parents didn't believe me, always had some explanation for me. We moved houses and tiny things would happen here and there, but once again my parents always chalked it up to an overactive imagination. There was a full body apparition that both my brother and I saw as it walked past a doorway while we were home alone. Fast forward to getting married and moving into an old apartment, things start to heat up a little bit. Bins would get flipped over and the contents dumped on the floor. Things would slide off of the back of our vanity, about 18 inches deep, and fly 3 feet to hit the footboard of our bed, not gently. More activity than I had experienced before, but still not a lot. We moved into an almost brand new apartment, and while 1 or 2 things happened, things calmed down significantly. Then we moved in with my in-laws while my husband went to school. Cue the real events. The house would go through periods of high activity, particularly centered around me. My husband would hear me calling him from another room, I wouldn't be calling him. He would see me pass by the bottom of the stairs as he was coming down and would follow me all the way around the corner into the far room, only to dead end with the room empty. I came in from the chicken coop to him, upset because I'd been calling him from all over the house. I'd been outside the whole time. It would make one of the dogs go absolutely feral, barking and snarling at nothing. I would have small, soft items thrown at me. I would hear clapping and walking around the house, and the dogs would go looking for what made the noise. Here's the main story. My husband was working nights and I was home alone on the farm while the in-laws were out of state on a trip. One of the dogs goes into an episode, staring at nothing in the middle of the living room, absolutely losing it, rabid dog. I can't get her to calm down. Usually a light touch on the back will snap her out of it, but I could not call her off this time. I finally go to my room to take a breather and I hear her stop. Maybe 15 minutes later she's at it again. I can't describe how terrifying it is to see her like this, like I said, absolutely feral. I go halfway up the stairs and am talking to her through the banister, finally get her to come over to me and stop barking. She keeps looking next to me at the top of the stairs, then a huge slam on the baby gate there happens, rattling the gate and the banister. I ignore it cause I've heard that's the best thing to do when something's right next to you. The dog barks but I get her stopped again. Then right in my line of sight I see a pen slid forcefully off the table, flying multiple feet before hitting the ground. The dog immediately runs to attack, and goes into another fit looking at something next to the table. I start to lose it, immediately go back downstairs to my bedroom. I sit on my bed next to my cat napping there. He stands up and comes to me since I'm upset and crying. I hear the dog move back to barking in the living room, closer to my room. A minute later my cat turns to look at the doorway, his back raises up, ears pinned back, and his hair stands on end looking straight at the doorway. I ran out of the house at that point. That was the worst it ever got. I have lots of other little stories though. I just moved into a brand new house and, knock on wood, nothing yet. I refuse to talk about paranormal activity aloud in any home I stay in, and I think subconsciously I pushed myself to only move into a new construction for fear of stirring anything in an existing house up. With what I know about the experiences through my life compared with where I was staying, I've kind of begun to think I might be a poltergeist. A new construction home was the only place I felt safe moving into. So while my story isn't to the level of a horror movie, I'm happy to be out of old houses and apartments. I live on the second floor of a 2-story apartment built in 1912, which originally was a mansion for some of the wealthiest in my town. I've had multiple occurrences where I'd be home by myself, and I'd hear whistling. Short tunes, usually only 2 notes or so, but they were so fucking clear and I could never figure out where it was coming from. My mom often tells me the story of when she was all asleep and dreamt of an older woman who seemed to be dressed in a more old-fashioned way slowly walk into her room and sit on her bed. When my mom woke up, she could still feel the pressure of someone sitting at the foot of her bed. When my mom sat up to go use the bathroom, she felt something slowly and gently push her back down onto her bed. Eventually, my mom was able to GRT up out of bed, but she could never figure out WTF happened. My childhood home was notoriously haunted. We moved into the house when I was around 6 and my brother was 3. It started slow with him and I seeing weird things at night and constant nightmares. Things would go missing only to return a few days later. We would constantly hear people talking, footsteps, and doors slamming when no one was around. Over the years it started to escalate and there are a lot of stories, so I have included a few. One parent was in their bedroom during a party when they heard a child running and the door to their walk-in closet creaked shut. She assumed it was me or my brother and went to open up the door. When she did, some of the t-shirts that were hung close to the floor were swaying. Peeking out from behind them was a little girl she did not know. The little girl vanished before her eyes. I was home alone waiting for my BF to come over. I heard him call my name, so I came out of my bedroom and headed towards the front door. When I came to the stairs that separated my room from the front door, I saw this thing. It almost resembled a person, pitch black, crawling up the stairs. It cracked its neck to look up at me and I ran. I called my BF and he wasn't there yet. I hid in my room until he came. The last one I'll put is after my family moved out, we rented it for a while. The tenant complained of similar things that we experienced in our first few months there. He went out of town and left his dog in the garage. His friend came to check on it and the dog was missing. He later found the dog, who was fine, just scared, locked in the crawl space that was completely separate from the garage and 2 closed doors away from where the dog was left. This crawl spaces was the worst place in the house for negative activity. This happened when I was 11 and visiting a lighthouse in Michigan that was supposedly haunted by a boy. My parents wanted to take a tour with the tour guide, but I wanted to play outside considering we had been touring various sites in the Upper Peninsula that day. No one was around, so my parents ended up letting me play outside the lighthouse while they took a quick tour. As I played outside, a really beat up ball rolled up to my feet. I bent over to pick it up, and as I stood back up I saw a boy standing next to the edge of the lighthouse looking at me. I assumed the ball was his, so I tossed it over to him and he wandered away. I didn't think any about it, but when my parents were done with the tour they asked what I did. I told them something along the lines of I was just wandering around. Oh, and I helped this kid get his ball back. The tour guide was with my parents, and when I mentioned the kid he looked startled because, as I mentioned earlier, there was no one other than us at the lighthouse. Only 3 cars. My parents' car, the tour guide's car, and the car belonging to the person at the front desk. The tour guide asked me to take a look at a picture in the lighthouse. I know this sounds super cliche, but when he showed me the picture, it was the picture of the exact same boy with the exact same beat up ball. Apparently, that kid died at the lighthouse. On a side note, we checked around and there was no boy, so you might be asking me, why was this creepy, especially considering that the boy never scared me or tried to scare me. What creeps me out is that I touched that ball. When it comes to ghost stories, most people only report a ghost, not other objects. Assuming that was a ghost with his ball. What the heck did I touch? Also, it felt solid, like a real ball. If it was a ghost ball, then how the heck do you explain what I touched? This still bothers me to this day. My family and I used to live in a house, which we've thankfully moved out of, that was apparently a small school before the owners bought and redid it. We were renting. My mom, sister and I all heard our names being whispered in the passage by my mom's bedroom. My mom would often see a little child peeking around the corner at her, and the one day we had people over for a braai and we were all in the kitchen. These people are heavily religious, think small Afrikaans town Christians, and did not believe in anything paranormal. While we were all sitting around chatting, my sister's Bluetooth speaker, that is like a radio setting, turned on out of nowhere with the volume completely up. The speaker was on the counter where we could all see it and nobody was near the speaker. Then one of our kitchen cupboards opened and closed on its own. They didn't come back to our house for a long time after that. One night my stepdad had turned the heater off and then switched the plug off at the wall before he went to bed, but when he came through into the lounge the next morning the heater was on again. He's the type of guy to just brush anything paranormal off and come up with a logical explanation for it, but he got extra spooked when he was running a bath one night and he only had the hot tap on. He left the bathroom for 2 seconds and when he came back the hot tap had been turned off and the cold tap was on. Finally, my weirdest experience there was when I was in the kitchen making food and I turned my back to put something in the microwave. I heard like a little knock sound, and when I turned to look, one of our kitchen utensils that had previously been on a hook above the counter was sitting on the counter itself. My sister was at school and my mom was in her bedroom on the opposite side of the house. I later befriended the owner's son and he told us that the neighbors they had when they still lived in the house, he was in grade 4, used to come over for braais all the time and were generally very friendly with the family. He started having horrific nightmares and seeing things in his bedroom that caused him to move to his brother's room or his parents' room at night. Turns out the neighbors that came over all the time were Satanists. The family had a priest come and bless the house twice and he stopped seeing things, but the nightmares never stopped and he still gets them now in his early 20s. All my life we've had weird experiences like mirrors coming flying off the wall, hearing and seeing things, and just generally unexplainable occurrences. My best was waking up in the middle of the night thinking that my cousin, who I was staying with at the time, had come into my room and was standing by my bed looking at me. I asked him what he wanted, and when he didn't answer I looked closer and realized that it wasn't my cousin. I ended up just saying sorry but I'm too tired for this and I have an exam tomorrow, and I turned over and went back to sleep. Many years ago I had a Ford Escort I really loved. One day I noticed the back right wheel was missing a single lug nut. No biggie, replaced. Soon though, one is missing on the same wheel. I assume the thread is stripped, but the shiny new lug nut is still there. Different one missing. This keeps happening and I assume all the threads are stripped a little bit. I don't want to lose a wheel though, so I get all new studs, go through the pain of driving the old ones out, way harder than I thought it would be, and get all new lug nuts to go with it. Before the week is out, I'm down one lug nut. I start checking my car every night and then again in the morning. Yep, disappearing overnight. Not on the ground either. Aha! I have a prankster. Feeling this is annoying but no big deal, very small town, I go sell some blood plasma a few times and then buy a big old bag of lug nuts. They keep vanishing and I keep replacing them. But then I notice one vanishes sometime after leaving for work and before I got home. Fallen off while driving? Weird. Coincidence? They're still occasionally vanishing overnight about once a week randomly. I start making marks in my owner's manual, morning before I leave, when I arrive at work, when I leave for work, when I get home. I check their tension frequently. Occasionally one is loose. This fits the random falling off but doesn't explain overnight disappearance. Sometimes it vanishes while I'm driving. Sometimes overnight. At least twice while in the parking lot at work. I'm beginning to feel very weird about it. It just doesn't add up. I keep writing stuff down as if that'll make it make sense. I carve symbols into the lug nut tops with a screwdriver to tell them apart: heart, spade, diamond, club, and it is definitely different ones vanishing. Not always the same location. I can't explain it. Finally I try a dangerous experiment. I simply let it run with 3/4 lug nuts. Cautiously at first, checking tension on the 3 remaining ones because I imagine the wheel falling off at highway speeds. But over time, nothing happens. I kept the car almost 2 full years after that and my back right wheel always just ran with 3 lug nuts. The only time I had one disappear was when I got new tires and the shop put a new one on. Once it vanished though, I let things be and it was always fine. Still no idea WTF that was. I don't know how disturbing it was really, but so odd. I am now curious what would have happened if I had had some kind of surveillance footage of the car at night. We live in an approximately 150-year-old farmhouse, with a cemetery across the road that hasn't seen a burial since 1870. Apparently the records office burned down, so they lost the exact plot locations and just opened up another cemetery 300 feet west of us. About a week after moving in, my wife and I were eating dinner, and my phone, which hadn't been touched in quite a while and was sitting on the kitchen counter, says in Siri's voice, "You are in my realm." And nothing more. We both heard it clear as day, and there was no history of the phone saying it. Then my cat was absolutely relentless in getting me out of bed in the middle of the night. At first I shrugged it off, but then got thinking maybe something was on fire or whatever. She led me downstairs, nothing. I went outside to see if there was anyone out there, and it was the deadest silence I've ever heard in my life. I noped out of that and came back inside. When I went to go back upstairs, I stood in something cold and wet. I bent down to see what it was, and my feet were totally dry. It was just a very strange cold spot. When I stood up, the feeling of a hand on my shoulder was unmistakable. The cat was just staring at me very intently. TV remotes go missing constantly. I think we've lost 6 now. I've had every single piece of furniture out of the TV room. As I renovated the whole thing, never found one. About a year and a half after moving in, I bumped into a former coworker at a flea market who knew where I lived but hadn't been told about any of the occurrences. She said, "Go introduce yourself to those people over there, they lived in your house in the 80s. So I did, and the first thing they asked was, "How is the ghost doing?" They said it had a fondness for messing with the TV and would open doors, sometimes at very useful times, like when carrying a bundle of firewood. And one more addition to the story, a good friend of mine, who I met after moving here, and again, never mentioned any of this stuff to, Was standing in my driveway and just randomly said, "Dude, there is some strong spirit activity here." Wow. From Indonesia, where paranormal activities are quite normal here. But then I had this one disturbing experience. One day I went into my uncle's home in Geneva. He loves collecting statues or historical stuff. Then I got a duty to take out the trash that day, and I went to the basement where his office room at. It's a small room like 2 by 3 meters. Then somehow I saw a statue of a goddess with 4 or 6 arms, and the aura in that room just suddenly cold. There were 4 rooms in the basement. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, office room, and storage room. Somehow after I took all of the trash, I cannot find the stairs to go back. It's gone, literally, gone. I was quite panicked, and then I smelled some strange scent, like an ancient flower. I went into the office room and I spoke to the statue. "Hey, I am sorry if I disturbed you in ways I cannot imagine. I need to go back upstairs, okay? Just let me go. Then after that, I can see the stairs again." But after that, it took me years to be able to go to any basements. My family has always seen, heard, and been around paranormal stuff. I have 2 that are final proof to me. One is distressing and the other has so few logical explanations. Distressing first, I had a friend that would crash at my place all the time. Slept in the lounge and struggled to sleep. Never said why, just complained. My mom asked him if he's seen the lady in white, and he said pretty seriously, "So she is real." Apparently comes into the back door and walks down the passage towards my room, or vice versa. Now before this talk happened, my GF at the time always woke me up to walk with her to the toilet to stand outside and walk back. I am scared of the dark too, but whatever, I can do it. Now it was my friend who asked her if she had seen the lady too, and they were talking about it. For those curious, I and my sister have seen since. We sleep on the opposite side to my mom. The proof one is in a hallway with no windows. We have a whiteboard. It's hung perfectly level, no funny business with the pen tray. South Africa has no, rarely ever, earthquakes. The door is next to but was closed on this occasion. All was still and calm. My dad and I were talking about the ghosts and what we hear and think when a pen launches off the tray for the whiteboard, as if somebody casually swept their hand out from whiteboard to edge of the tray. So the pen flew off horizontally. No cats and nobody was standing within a meter of it. It wasn't violent, but like you popped it off onto the floor to annoy somebody and make them pick up. Not that I'm saying that was an intention, but the kind of trajectory it took. Didn't spin, so it wasn't an edge catching. There are no edges. It was just on the tray in the middle. When I was around 5 years old, late 1970s/early 1980s, we lived in a haunted house in South Florida. This house was probably built in the 1960s, so not all that old. I can only remember some of the incidents. We would often hear footsteps coming from the attic and other loud noises that could not be explained. Sounds of furniture being moved around with nobody in the room. I specifically remember one morning lying in bed, a face appeared on the wall above my bedroom window and repeatedly told me to go to my parents' bedroom. No idea why it wanted me to do that, but I can still remember it plain as day. Apparently my older sister and mother also had several experiences while we lived there. My mom was home alone cleaning the house up right after we moved in. She opened a door to one of the bedrooms and there was a young man standing in there, completely still. She said she didn't feel frightened, but didn't know what to do. She closed the door, waited a minute, and reopened it, and he was gone. I asked how she knew it wasn't a burglar or someone sleeping in here, but she said she just knew he wasn't real. Not sure how to explain that one. I wouldn't say distressing, but it's a big reason I keep my bedroom door shut while sleeping, also a big reason I keep the lights on at night. When I was in middle school, I kept my bedroom door open one night. That night my father was out drinking or something. I say something, as he was cheating on my mother at this time, so who's to say, he didn't come back by the time I went to bed. So when I heard the front door slam shut in the middle of the night, I thought, Dad's home. Then I went back to sleep as I heard him walk up the stairs to the living room. The house I lived in, for context, had stairs right as you entered through the front door or garage door, up to the living room and down to the basement. Then more stairs when you walked up, leading to the bedrooms on the third floor that were over the garage. Never heard him walk up to my parents' bedroom that was in view from my bedroom door. I felt something was watching me. I woke up slowly to see what I presumed was my father in the doorway. I squinted at him because he plays jokes like this, trying to scare me and my sisters. When I got a good look at the man in the doorway, I couldn't see any features. I went to wipe my eyes and get a better look at him. I stared at the man and two white eyes stared back. I realized this wasn't my father. I didn't scream or jump back in fear. Instead, I did what any sensible person would do. Cover my face and hide in my sheets. I heard the man walk over to my bed after I hid. I could feel him still staring at me. He was close enough I could hear him breathing. I just cried, hoping it was all a dream, or a prank my dad was playing on me. I eventually cried myself to sleep. I woke up that morning scared out of my mind, to find my father sleeping on the couch. I didn't tell anyone about what happened at the time. I didn't have the best relationship with my father, so I never approached him about it either when he woke up. However, I asked my mom when Dad got home and she didn't know, as he never came to bed. I slept with my door closed from then on. When I would sleep on a couch or a room with no doors from that night onward, I always felt someone was watching me from the corner of the room. But as I got older, it slowly stopped happening. He now seems to come back when I drive at night. Sometimes I think I see him in my back seat or on the sidewalk. So I think whatever this is, it's still attached to me. But I have never seen him as clearly as I saw him that night he stood in my bedroom doorway. Don't mean to leave it like that. But nothing else has happened, nor has he shown himself the past 4 months. So it's good for the time being. So I live in the Midwest, and the shit that goes on around my house is pretty messed up. We never really said it out loud, but no one ever went in the woods behind the house. It was like an unspoken rule. Even inside the house with the window facing the woods, my parents only closed those curtains for that specific window. To the right of my house is a very large field we use to plant corn or soybeans for our farm, and behind our house is miles of woods. Our neighbors live about a 15 minutes drive away, so we're separated by a lot of miles. I remember growing up as a kid, and me and my sister and brother would play this game called Ghost in the Graveyard. It's basically hide and seek, but it was in our long driveway and front yard, and you play it at night. I remember one July when I was 9, me and my cousins were playing Ghost in the Graveyard. One older cousin was kind of a jackass, and wanted to play in the woods because it was scarier. And with us being kids and I being the youngest, we played in the woods. The whole thing felt so off. I hid behind this massive tree right next to the field. We had flashlights, but you had to turn them off in order to hide. So I was sitting in pitch dark, and the only thing I could really see was the field next to me. 1 second you could hear crickets, owls and frogs, and then it went super quiet. About 5 minutes into waiting to be found, it began to smell like literal sewage. Like shit and rotten meat were mixed into a blender. So I stood up and looked for my cousin, turned my flashlight. I remember gagging as I walked because it smelled so bad. As I walked there wasn't any noises or anything that scared me, I just felt like something was following me. So naturally, 9-year-old me started crying, running and calling out for help. My cousin found me, and we were yelling for the other kids to come back to the house because we were done playing. No one responded, so we went in the house to grab the adults to tell everyone to come inside. We grabbed my dad, and he came outside and yelled for everyone to come inside. There was no rustling or even a response. So my dad grabbed his flashlight and went out and helped us look. Eventually all the adults came out to look because we had no idea where the kids were. Everyone started panicking, and my dad pulled out his truck and his deer spotlight to see if we could find them along the trail. We stayed out looking for them for about 5 hours, and finally we found the first kid. Nothing happened to him, but he would have had to take a car to wander out that far into the woods. It was literally miles. Same with the other kids that we began to find by morning. Each kid had the same story. They heard our voices calling from the farthest side of the woods, opposite to where our house was, and they were trying to get away from the smell. Now on Thanksgiving we always talk about it, and even thinking about the smell now makes me gag. My family moved into a newly built home in a small town that my dad immediately insisted was haunted. None of us experienced anything important, since my mom has previously lived in a house she believed was haunted, my sister and I too, but we were too little then to remember any of the events she says we experienced. So we waved Dad's concerns off. Fast forward 7 or 8 years, I'm around 25 at the time. We've got the house on the market and most of my family has moved out. I live there with a friend who needed a place to stay, and with my little brother staying part-time. And our 2 cats. I've moved into the master bedroom. One night, I'm woken up by the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. I usually leave it open a little so the cats can come and go, so I figure it's one of them. But as I roll over, I realize they're both in bed with me. So I look toward the door and see a humanoid shape slink into my room. I use the term literally, it was trying to stay quiet and keep a low profile. At first I think it's my roommate. She, comes in once in a while. But then I remember she's not home. Mind starts running fast. Little brother? No, he's not home either. Conclusion, I'm home alone and there's someone in my room. I start to get up, and this figure starts clicking and gibbering at me. No words. My eyes are adjusting, and I'm looking at this feral, hairy, humanoid shape. About 4 feet tall. Best description I can give is goblinoid. And naked. As I'm realizing I can't identify it, the thing fucking lunges at me. I defend myself with the only option at hand, a super heavy blanket I sleep with. The creature has me on my back, pinned on my bed, and is just wailing on me. Scratches and punches. The scratches are running off the blanket, heaviest, thickest blanket I've ever had, but I can feel the punches. I've accidentally pulled the blanket over my head, as I was still gripping it when I brought my arms up to protect my face. Here's thing 1, I was bullied and left alone a lot as a kid. I overcame a lot of fear and loneliness. I had come to pride myself on my ability to handle threats and situations, and that included the unsubstantiated belief many of us develop that we'd handle a supernatural situation well. And I don't want to let myself down. Every monster has a weakness, and I don't want to let this one do whatever it is doing without a fight. I thrust both arms upwards to knock this creature off balance, and then roll to throw it off me. And as soon as I do, it disappears. I'm sitting up in my bed, sweating and breathing hard. My cats are awake now, looking at me like nothing's wrong. But I can still feel some of the harder hits that creature dealt. Hell, I can smell it. The room is dark, but dead silent, so after a moment I bound out of bed and start turning lights on. Nothing. I went through the whole house, and grabbed a knife in the kitchen. Nothing and no one. A dream, right? Well, here's thing 2, I'm a lucid dreamer. I know when I'm dreaming. Also, you know how a lot of people say they can't fight or throw punches in dreams? I can. But it takes conscious effort. And I didn't feel any of that. It just didn't feel like a dream. Still, that's the cleanest answer, right? Especially given my cat's lack of panic. Just a dream. And I had myself convinced of that until a few years later, so I didn't tell anyone about it. But my brother and I left the house before it was sold, so my sister moved in and was living there with her boyfriend and their friend. I didn't learn about this until a few years after the house did sell, but they started hearing shit. Including the clicking and gibbering of my feral goblin. This drew many and I told you so from Dad. We bought a house last year. Freshly remodeled but built in the early 60s, we live in a county that has a very bad history as far as native slaughters go. We live on what was once Pomo land. Very dirty, sad history. Hiking in the area is unsettling. It's a small town that just seems stuck in time. Very little endeavors are successful here and a majority of the people are on drugs. Anyways, 8 months and I put my kids to bed. Both girls ages 11 and 6. Hours go by and all is quiet. Eventually my partner goes to bed. I stayed up scrolling TikTok and smoking. I get off late, so this is my quiet unwind time. It's about 1 a.m. My German Shepherd, who is generally submissive and quiet, starts growling so loud I can hear her from the patio. Our house is rather large, but we have 3 large sliding glass doors in the patio. We can see both girls' rooms. I gave my dog the command to hush because there's no threat. She goes off every few minutes. Next thing I know, from the corner of my eye I see my 6-year-old walking down the hall through the windows. She has super curly red hair and was wearing a hot pink Hello Kitty nightgown. Pretty hard to miss. After hearing rustling and her not getting back to her room after a minute or two, I went to check on her. At this point the only light on is the patio, which shines, and the sliding glass doors making the hall visible. I went in and started flipping on lights. No sign of her in the kitchen or living room, but I heard something in my partner's office. As that room is off limits, I stomped over to it, ready to be irritated with whatever she was getting into. I flipped on the light and nothing. It freaked me out, so I trotted my pudgy ass down the hall. There she was in bed, soundly sleeping. Tucked in with her stuffies, just as she had been when I put her to bed. I thought maybe I was just tired and seeing and hearing shit. I went back out to smoke and watched the hall like a hawk. After 20 minutes there was nothing. As I was about to put my cigarette out, I heard my dog growl again. This time more vicious than before. I snapped my head up to see my 6-year-old zooming down the hall. She stopped, blew me a kiss, and ran towards my partner's office. Again I followed, and again she was nestled in bed. I'm not sure what to make of this, and it's been months, but every now and then I catch a glimpse of my kids who are not actually there. My grandparents bought land and initially lived in a trailer there while building their home. My mom lived in the trailer with them and told me many stories, but the most disturbing was about something crawling on the ground beside her bed and whispering her name. She also had something get in the bed and lay down beside her. After the house was built, she started messing with Ouija boards and actually had it tell her the name of the man she actually married later in life. His name was Shannon, which she thought was weird at the time because it seemed more like a girl's name. The thing she was talking to told her what it looked like, and she woke up with it standing over her bed one night. She would wake up in the middle of the night and it would have turned off every light. She lived in a downstairs apartment at the time and would purposely leave on the TV and several other lights. I lived in the house and wound up moving into her old bedroom and eventually into the downstairs apartment. It came out one night when I had friends over, slammed doors, ran through the upstairs of the house, talked to us on recording. My friend saw the ghost of our dead cat walk through the wall. Same cat got in bed with my grandma once. I saw the shadow of something with horns on my wall one night. There are stories about this thing going into my grandma's room from before I was born. I had a man moan in my ear once while I was up drawing around 2 a.m. alone. My mom's ex actually saw her in the downstairs den and that version of her floated through the furniture. He was a big guy and had served time in prison but was legit terrified with his arm hair standing up after he saw it. I saw a ghost of myself in an empty mirror once. There are more stories, but these are the main ones that always creeped me out. I think my mom using the Ouija board riled things up, but things started before she ever even did that, so I thought maybe it could be an Indian burial ground or something. I will mention that in a previous house in a previous relationship while I was pregnant with my now 6-year-old my ex-partner, and I would hear what could only be described as a large rock rolling on our hardwood floors. The night I went into labor I went out to get some water and every single cabinet door was open and swinging back and forth in rhythm. I screamed for my partner and when he made it to the kitchen they were still swinging. He, freaked out, reached up and touched one and they all stopped at the same time. We both were freaked out and went to our room and put on a funny movie to calm our nerves. 30 minutes into it we heard the rolling. I freaked out and stood up and boom, NY water broke. I've gone through a few wild things. The first I don't remember as I was very young, but my parents rented a seriously old house at the time that with train tracks in the backyard, no joke. A house that my mom claimed was used in the war, assuming a civil war, to aid wounded soldiers. I don't really remember the house, but my bedroom there was previously a porch, so Lamau it was old. One night I ran crying from my room yelling, "Mommy, the man! The man is in my room." I don't remember that at all. My dad immediately went to check and nothing according to my mom. I tended to sleep on the floor next to my parents' bed as a kid because I was afraid to be alone at night. Even when we moved out of that house and into their permanent house, I would sleepwalk out into the living room as well. One night I was laying on the couch with arm hanging off up over the arm of the couch. I was still asleep until I felt a very small hand in mine. I woke up very quickly. I was still very young, so I don't remember what happened after that. That house was wild. I'd stepped into the kitchen one night suddenly. Across the kitchen was the laundry room and you and see the dryer from the entrance of the kitchen. There was a black TV fuzz plume of matter in front of the dryer that dissolved into nothing the moment my presence entered and the dryer door fling open hard suddenly. I have no explanation for that one. I was fully awake in my mid-teens at the time. One night a group of us were walking around. It was getting late and we stopped in front of some older, big dark houses and my good friend suddenly paled. At the same time I felt something behind me. An overwhelming feeling. There's someone behind me, isn't there? All my friend could do was nod. We dipped so fast, lol. My friend told us later it was a little boy that had been behind me. Dude, I gotta contact them and get their version of that one. Around that same time I had my desk set up in an L and was doing something later at night, lights on, when I felt hands on my thigh. I froze and looked down at the desk on my side and there was a man sitting under it. He was smiling, grinning before he laughed and disappeared. I jumped up so fast. I was on top of my chair panicking because what the hell, lol, I really can't explain it at all. I never saw him again. None of that stuff followed me from Missouri to my new life in the West. No idea why. I experienced a lot of trauma that wasn't supernatural as well, so TBH what's real or not, but those things really impacted me. So I was young and was getting towards big boy age, so I started sleeping with no nightlight and the door closed. I had a dream about being on my school playground and dropping a bag of barbecue pop chips down into the middle of the spiral fire pole. And then I woke up and was sleeping on my side. All I saw in front of me was a black fingerless hand. It moved out of my vision, but as you can guess I was scared shitless. It was the strangest feeling, because I paid there for at least 20 minutes still and contemplating whether or not to scream out for my mom. But I was a big kid by this point, so I just chalked it up to being my imagination, and also I was scared that somehow I would be instantly murdered if I did anything. After a while of literally staying in the same position from when I woke up, like my muscles started to ache, I was just frozen. But I muttered up the courage to move my leg and extend I from the bent position when I felt a hand just gently touch my thigh. And through non-verbal communication I got the vibe of just stop and don't move. It wasn't aggressive and surprisingly gentle, almost like a don't worry in a way. But after that I was just frozen still. And keep in mind that whatever this is behind me. And it was the strangest feeling, I knew that a hand was being waved over my body because I just felt it in me, if that makes sense. It just gave me a weird sensation over whoever the hand was hovering. And this continued from head to toe until sunrise. And about an hour before sunrise I felt something sit on the end of my bed. I was still terrified, so I didn't move until the sun was fully up and my room was illuminated. When I got up and looked around, there was a print at the end of my bed like something had sat there. Blah blah blah, told my mom, went to therapy, nothing came of it. I have no siblings and my door was never opened. Throughout all my living spaces, I still push my bed up to the wall so that I'm sure nothing can be behind me. And wake up in the middle of the night. I refuse to toss and turn my back away from the wall. I know it wasn't sleep paralysis because I could still move, and I don't think part kid is demons touch you and leave imprints on your sheets.